Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that two of them think doing a podcast called Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea is a pretty neat idea. They are Jeff and Bryan. Hi there, this is Jeff. I'm with my friend Bryan, and this is our Christmas
bonus episode.
Hey Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing great, Bryan. How are you?
Oh, I'm not so sure I know all the answers today, but I'm going to try.
Okay, well, you always have an answer.
Yes, well, there's always an answer, right?
Right, there is always an answer. But before we get to the answers, I want to talk about our last episode a little bit.
Okay.
And I totally brushed off the epilogue, and you went right along with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we really need to talk about the epilogue just a little bit, because the epilogue did have a point that I didn't immediately realize, and it was only I came across something that I went, oh, now it makes sense.
Okay.
Great. A while ago, somebody told me if you watch a TV commercial and it doesn't make any sense to you and you're like, what is that all about?
Mm-hmm.
You're not the target market.
Right.
So,
okay.
If you read this epilogue and you're going, what is this all about? You're not the target audience.
Okay.
So the epilogue's about a genetic engineer whose name is Blart Versenwald III, and he was easily distracted. His world was threatened by invaders from a distant star who were on their way. He was tasked with building a breed of super warriors to fight off these invaders.
Right.
But in trying to design the super warriors, he was continually distracted and designed many other very useful things. The invaders arrived, but there were no super warriors. However, the invaders were so taken by his other breakthroughs that they celebrated with them and they set up trade agreements and cultural exchanges. And basically everybody lived happily ever after.
Right.
During the telling of the story, he would go off on a tangent, and then it would be brought back to topic with oh, never mind about that. And then, of course, it ends with what we said before, which is, there was a point to the story, but it has temporarily escaped the chronicler's mind.
Right.
This was a message to publishers and editors that people are not machines, and writing does not just happen. There is a process, and well, screw deadlines. So
okay.
This wasn't a message to his readers. This was a big FU to all of the people that were hassling him about finishing this book and getting this book out before he was ready to put the book out. So
okay.
He just wanted to end with a little statement to them. And to tell other authors, I guess, that you're not alone in being hassled by your editors and your publishers. And the process is the process, and it is finished when it is finished.
Right.
So I thought we brushed it off, or I brushed it off too much. And since I found out that it had a real purpose, I did want to bring it up at the beginning of this podcast. For those who didn't already realize it. And there may have been people who have read the book and knew exactly what that epilogue was about, who were shaking their heads going, those idiots.
Well, that's a clear understanding. Excellent.
Yes. All right. So I answered a question, which
There
is,
you go.
what the heck was that epilogue all about? All right. With that out of the way, we're just going to jump right into the questions for this book.
You bet.
Questionable answer 1.
When Arthur is hitchhiking in the rain, a driver did the trick of putting on the brakes and making Arthur think he was going to get a ride. And then at the last moment, he sped away.
Right.
Shortly after that, the driver went into the hospital to have his appendix out, and the surgeon removed his leg in air. But before the appendectomy could be rescheduled, the appendicitis complicated into a serious case of peritonitis. Then it said that justice, in its way, was served. Did that punishment really fit the crime?
Oh, yeah. Well, no, of course not. But then again, I'm not sure exactly which part of the subsequent events that happened to the gentleman was the punishment. You might suggest that it was his death, and I might suggest it was just removing his leg.
True. However, in the multiple readings of the book or going through the book, the first time I read it, I thought he died. And in subsequent readings, I do not believe he actually died.
Oh, you're right.
So he didn't die. He just got real sick and has one less leg.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know we're going to talk a little bit about this whole process because in this book we find ourselves kind of twisted up in some kind of logics that don't necessarily make sense to us immediately.
Correct.
So I'm wondering about the nature of cosmic justice, and that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Absolutely.
So I don't really know the answer to that question.
I think that the punishment was a little severe. That was karma plus. That wasn't just karma.
You bet.
Questionable answer 2.
The restaurant at the end of the universe did a story so far and said that just before the critical moment of readout, the Earth was unexpectedly demolished by the Vogons to make way for a new hyperspace bypass. And so all hope of discovering a meaning for life was lost forever. In both The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, it said that a girl suddenly realized what it was that had been going wrong all this time, and she finally knew how the world could be made a good and happy place. And before she could get to a phone to tell anyone about it, a terribly stupid catastrophe occurred and the idea was lost forever. So at the exact same moment, 2 things were lost forever. The hope of discovering the meaning of life and a revelation about how to live in universal peace that was had by a girl who was on the planet and part of the computer matrix trying to discover the meaning of life. Are these 2 lost things the same concept or totally unrelated to each other? If Fenchurch's revelation was not the end product result of the 10 million year long program, what do you think the form of readout was going to be?
Excellent questions.
Yeah.
Excellent questions. And I think it's clear, well, I say we're in agreement on the way that these 2 thoughts came to be. I think, let me try to phrase this correctly. We're looking at the computer program running for Earth for the 10 million year period, and we're imagining that we're coming to the conclusion where the readout is about to occur. And we know that that's part of what Adams was saying here. And I think what you're saying and what's implied by what we're saying, that 2 things are lost here, is that as a result of that vortex of knowledge, if you will, or the spinning of the question as it's being developed, we have this ancillary result where Fenchurch gets an understanding of how. So her understanding of how could easily have been a result, as you say, of the program being run. So I don't think they're unrelated. It's like we had discussions before about how, who, what, when, where, why. There's a series of questions here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the question we're going to get out of Earth is going to be a what question.
All right.
What is the meaning of life? The answer that Fenchurch gets is a how. How do we take this knowledge and make it into a livable type of arrangement? Right. And as we know, because the answer and the question are mutually exclusive, that they can't exist in the same space at the same time.
Correct.
Otherwise, the universe would be turned around.
And some would say it's already happened.
Yes, exactly. So it means that we're not going to be able to know both at the same time. And I wish I had some idea. I wonder, because in thinking about the output, the only thing that I can think of is, like Deep Thought had this room of control, I wonder if the Earth didn't have one of those.
Mm-hmm.
Where the people from the other dimension could gather and ask and get their question answered, or get their question questioned,
Right.
or get their answer questioned.
Yeah. Something like that.
You know, I don't know. That's a good question. We never get of any kind of an idea of how that output would occur. But if I were to imagine it, I would imagine those same two sages showing up in a little room somewhere on their own dimension, saying, "Okay, we're ready. Give it to us."
Yes, true.
Questionable answer 3.
Like in old cartoons, where a very small creature who is extremely strong can lift somebody over their head by their finger, how does a disembodied arm, no matter how strong, gain any leverage to be able to slam anybody into a bar top?
Oh, gosh. I've been thinking about this question for quite some time.
I bet.
And my answer is art.
Art. Yes, that is the perfect answer for this series of books. But you know what I'm talking about, the cartoons.
100%. Yeah, I mean there's no logical nature to it. The only other joking thought I had was they talk about a phantom limb syndrome.
Yes.
Where if you've had it amputated, you can still feel the motions or imagine the motions of the limb. And I've seen things where they put people that have one arm in like a mirror, or in a mirror situation where they can imagine their other arm, and they do that so that they can release the tension on the hands or the fingers or something like that. So
right.
It's kind of jokingly, I think to myself, that this disembodied arm has this phantom body.
Yeah, okay, yes.
that
yes, phantom body syndrome.
Well, yes,
Right.
phantom body syndrome. But there's no logic to it.
There's not.
Questionable answer 4.
Ford was rebroadcasting the speaking clock back to Earth as a joke. It said it would take 400 years for the pencil-thin beam to get to Earth, and would cause quite a stir when it did. Do you think it would? Or do you think 400 years from now, we will have become space travelers by then, and beaming information from other stars wouldn't be so weird?
It's a good question. And I'm trying to remember the exact sequence of events here. This is before he decided to return to Earth.
Yes.
If I remember correctly in the book.
No, it was on his... Was it before he decided to? In chapter 5 is when he is with the disembodied arm and then meets the prostitute and realizes that the guide is updated, and if something weird is happening, he wants it to happen to him.
Right.
Chapter 10 is the scene of the speaking clock.
Right. Okay, so
chapter 5, he decides to go back. Chapter 10, that he's upset at the Sirius Cybernetics salesman and wants to bankrupt him with the phone bill.
right. So I think his little joke about
Which joke?
I'm sorry, it's not really a joke, but when he says that in the 400 years that it'll take for the pencil thin beam to get to the Earth, it would cause quite a stir. Doesn't fit the logic of the story, like you said.
Correct. But at least he didn't send the beam before he found out the Earth was back.
That's true. That's true.
I couldn't believe
true.
that was going to happen. So I'm glad I sorted that out with,
me too.
with those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't believe he doesn't believe that in 400 years that the Earth won't be a spacefaring race.
Correct. Once he decides to return to Earth, he knows that he's bringing this giant battleship with him. And of course, the giant battleship essentially crashes onto the planet, killing many people and landing in a very populated area. So I don't know how he would have thought the logic out to say that this pencil-thin beam of the time clock coming back hundreds of years in the future would be funny, except like he says, he does it to see if he can bankrupt the guy.
Yes.
And to directly answer your question, I think the 400 years in the future, we would be a spacefaring race of beings.
I'm pretty sure that we will be as well.
Questionable answer 5.
So this is one of my favorite questions because he just wrote it. He just writes something and then he contradicts himself in his writing. So when he's talking about the sausages that are in pubs near train stations, he says that the sausages are for the ones who know what their sins are and wish to atone for something specific. Immediately after that, he mentions Arthur bought sausages and didn't know why. Well, he just said Arthur really does know why, so what is Arthur atoning for?
Oh, gosh. If I knew that, then I'd know a lot more about the universe than I think I do.
Oh, okay. That's an easy way out.
Well, it's funny. I'm sure that if he looks back across his life, he's got a lot to atone for.
I think it's simpler than that. He's just atoning for all his impure thoughts while he's looking at Fenchurch across the table.
Well, that could be an answer. I like that.
Questionable answer 6.
So then in our introduction to Wonko the Sane, the passage says, 8 hours west, a man sat alone on a beach, mourning an inexplicable loss. He could only think of his loss in little packets of grief at a time, because the whole thing was too great to be borne. We learn this man is John Watson, or Wonko the Sane. What did he lose? Everything he cares for is a bit nonspecific.
I'm not sure that it is nonspecific, because in the odd conversation that Arthur has with the gentleman from the tabloid, that's where he gets introduced to Wonko the Sane. And the tabloid gentleman describes him as knowing everything about the dolphins.
Correct.
So the thing
more than anybody on the planet.
Right. And so the thing that Wonko is upset about and grieving about are all the dolphins. Every single solitary one of them. So
okay,
it's
so the
that
dolphins
loss.
are everything.
Yes, the dolphins are everything. That was what he devoted his entire life to.
And then they left him.
So,
but they gave him a bowl.
Right. And that's why they describe it as having, he could only think of it at packets at a time, like individual encounters that he had each individual time, rather than realizing that all of them are gone and never to return.
Right. Okay, I understand that.
Questionable answer 7.
So my next question is about the rain god. The rain god, Rob McKenna, is the sole owner and driver of McKenna's all-weather haulage. Why is it called all-weather when he only drives in the rain?
Well, it's a good question, but I think it's one of those, technical English language questions. Really what it comes down to. Every company on the planet's going to drive in the sunshine.
Yes.
Every planet, they're going to drive whenever it's beautiful and nice outside. But only the rain god is going to drive in all weather, which includes rain.
Yes, it does.
And all weather, and I think about that, when I buy a pair of tires, or a set of tires, I'm going to buy a set of tires for all weather, which includes sunshine and rain.
And snow.
So it really is about the weather that he knows he's going to have to drive through.
Right. I guess it's not that he doesn't want to drive in the sunshine.
He just never gets the
He
opportunity.
never had the chance. Exactly.
He would surely deliver during the sunny day. Just hasn't happened in 15 years.
Nope.
Questionable answer 8.
Every once in a while, Douglas Adams likes to get philosophical.
Mm-hmm.
And this question has weighed on my mind, and so I'm hoping that you have a good answer.
Oh, me too.
Is the purpose of having the sun go low in the evenings, in the summer, especially in parks, to make girls' breasts bob up and down more clearly to the eye?
I'd like to answer that question, but in fear of all the women in my life, I think I'm going to say, I don't know.
I don't know. They bob up and down in all weather.
That'll work.
Okay. So if you didn't read the book, that was a question that was posed by some teenage boys who were walking through Hyde Park when Arthur and Fenchurch went there to visit. And he doesn't answer it.
No. He tries to play it safe.
Yes. I'm surprised he didn't check to see if that was what was wrong with Fenchurch.
Questionable answer 9.
Oh, so now I have a question that is not on your list. So you're going to have to just wing this one.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle of the conversation Arthur was having with the reporter, Murray Bose Tenson,
yes,
Murray said, "Excuse me, something has just fallen out of my ear. Just remembered what an odd evening I had last night. I'd like to know what fell out of his ear and many other details about that night if you know them."
Oh, gosh. Well, we know that it wasn't a small puff of green fluff.
Or green putty or green full fluff. Yeah. And it couldn't have been a babelfish because he was on Earth.
Couldn't have been a babelfish. Nope. Oh, I'm thinking it was confetti.
Confetti, yeah. Or glitter or sequins.
There you go. Any one of those threes would be surprising.
Yes.
Questionable answer 10.
So I guess there are times that Douglas likes to leave things up to interpretation, and this might be one of them. So when it came to the bowls that all three of them received, we are told that Wonko's bowl said, "So long and thanks for all the fish." It is explained why very satisfactorily in the book.
Yes.
Arthur's bowl said, "So long and thanks," and it's followed by 3 dots. What is he being thanked for? We learned that Fenchurch also got a bowl, but it was never confirmed or disconfirmed or unconfirmed or non-confirmed. I don't know what the opposite is.
One of those 3 things.
Right. If anything was written on it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's an engraved inscription on Fenchurch's bowl? If so, what do you think it said, and why?
Oh, geez. Excellent questions. Like you said, the Wonko's bowl was thoroughly explained.
Correct.
Because of his love of dolphins, and he probably actually fed them fish. Arthur's bowl, only thing we know about Arthur for a fact in this story is that the universe is greatly influenced by Arthur's actions, or the universe greatly influences Arthur's actions.
Right.
So for some reason, he's a major character in this particular universe.
Correct.
Obviously, the author thinks so.
Right.
I mean, we talked about that at the beginning of the discussion of this book.
Right.
This is Fenchurch's life through Arthur's eyes.
Correct.
And so I'm not sure what the dolphins would be thanking him for. Maybe in part for being human.
Yes.
That would be my guess.
Well, I do know that they talk about it in the story that he wanted to stop in and donate to the organization that was there to help the dolphins.
Correct.
And he got all kinds of flack because he didn't realize they were gone.
Exactly.
So I can't believe that was the first time he's ever donated like that.
No, you're probably absolutely correct. That makes sense. He probably was an individual who was caring towards the dolphins. But as you said, there's only 3 bowls, so I mean, there's thousands of people who love dolphins.
3 that we know of.
Yes, you're right. 3 that we
Only
know.
3 that interacted with this story.
Right. And Fenchurch and her bowl, I'm going to say there's a different angle there. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about Fenchurch in this questionable answer thing as well. So
Yes.
She also has a very special place in the universe. And her bowl, I'm going to say, doesn't have anything on it because we don't really know what she knew and when she knew it.
Yes.
Questionable answer 11.
In our podcast about the book, we did talk about the dolphins and their super intelligence and their abilities to bend space and all kinds of other things that we can't even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And Wonko was very important to the dolphins. So I understand why Wonko might have retained knowledge from before. And I know why Arthur would, because he left the Earth with Ford when it was destroyed. But I have no idea why Fenchurch should have received a bowl or special help from the dolphins. She now suffers great anxiety about revelations. She has a fractured mind. She is slightly out of sync with this universe and her feet do not touch the ground. She spent months since the event medicated and in and out of institutions. Did the dolphins do her any favors?
That's a good question. And I don't think we've even talked about this, but I'm going to make a speculation here that for me sort of answers a bunch of different questions about Fenchurch.
Okay.
We really haven't talked about too much about multiverses and their effect on Adams's world here. But let's just make one assumption.
Okay.
At least maybe you could agree to this. When we're talking about the Earth, Mark 1,
Okay.
I'm going to suggest that even though the multiverse exists in this story, that the Earth Mark 1 is an individual place. It's a locust or a center line on a graph for the existence of this space. So there is only one planet in one universe, in one dimension, where the question is being calculated and developed.
Okay.
So if we can call this the 00 point or the Earth Mark 1 as the singular location, I'm going to suggest that Fenchurch is from and of that world.
Okay.
So the Fenchurch that we encounter on not the Earth Mark II, because we know that that was not in fact developed because they put a stop to that.
Right.
The Earth that exists within the space that the Earth originally exists now is a different Earth where Fenchurch does not exist.
Okay.
Or at the least the Fenchurch of that Earth does not exist. And the original Fenchurch from the 00 place has been placed on this special Earth,
Okay.
brought there by the dolphins. And that is why she is of the Earth, but not on the Earth. That her existence there is an anomaly. And
Right.
that is why she does not touch the Earth. And
Right.
why, when, her feet don't touch the ground, because she is on it, but not of it. That's the way I like to think about it. And that's why I think the sync, the her being out of phase and out of sync and a fractured mind. Now, why the dolphins knew of her, why they chose her, can't really say, except they have to have some connection to the universe that we don't understand. Obviously, they do. So, and did they do her any favors? Ugh, good question. They made her suffer more than they. made her suffer more than they would have wanted, I think. So yeah, the medication and all that stuff, not good. So I'm gonna have to say no on that.
Questionable answer 12.
As long as we're talking about Fenchurch and her being out of sync, the book only mentions her feet not touching the ground.
Right.
However, when they were in the park and Arthur was telling his story about the biscuits, he said, "Took another one. Honestly, this is exactly what happened. He took another biscuit. He ate it. Clear as daylight. Certain as we are sitting on the ground." Then the book says, Fenchurch stirred uncomfortably. So, that makes me think she wasn't sitting on the ground.
Exactly.
So do you think any part of Fenchurch touches the ground?
No, I agree with you. I think that none of her actually physically touches the ground. She's definitely out of phase with that world that she's on.
Questionable answer 13.
The next question I would have that's kind of related to this is if she couldn't fly when she stepped out of the loft door, would she have hit the ground?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, it is a good question, although I guess we have to assume that she could have been hurt by it.
Well, coming to a complete and total dead stop 1 inch above the ground is going to be just as devastating.
Exactly.
As hitting the ground.
And so her potential for flying is greater than most people. But obviously, like you say, an invisible barrier that's 1 inch above the ground is still a barrier.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Questionable answer 14.
The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy said the dolphins had long known of the impending destruction of the planet Earth and had made many attempts to alert mankind of the danger, but most of their communications were misinterpreted as amusing attempts to punch footballs or whistle for tidbits. So they eventually gave up and left the Earth by their own means shortly before the Vogons had arrived. Wonko says, in So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, that the bowl he received is a farewell gift from the dolphins. He said that he loved and studied and swam with them and fed them with fish. He even tried to learn their language, a task which they seemed to make impossibly difficult, considering the fact that I now realize they were perfectly capable of communicating in ours if they decided they want to. So, why didn't they want to, in their many attempts to alert mankind, communicate in our language?
Oh, gosh. What a great question. And the only thing that I could think of about what might justify their actions and the way they went about things is if they had chosen to speak to one individual, that one individual would never have been able to convince mankind to change their direction or do something about the Vogons.
Yes.
Because that one individual would have been considered insane.
Even if mankind knew they couldn't do anything about the Vogons.
That's also 100% true. My answer is really kind of, I'm thinking they were trying to communicate with a larger section or a mass part of mankind when they were doing their flips and whistles and all that kind of stuff. So they were making an attempt at convincing a group of humans rather than an individual.
Right.
As to why, again, it's a matter of timing. What did they say that the destruction plans were in the works for 50 years? but it doesn't really say here when the dolphins learned of the destruction, but it does kind of imply in the book and in the movies that it was a couple of weeks before the destruction is when they left.
Yes.
But you're right. It does seem selfish. If they knew how to speak, well, whatever version of English or whatever.
Or
why
every
didn't
language. They could probably speak every language on the planet.
Well, yeah, if they had a babelfish in their ear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a twisted question. But again, I guess the only answer I can think of is that they didn't learn with enough time to have an effect, so maybe they gave up just as we would have had to.
Yes, yeah, I guess. I'm also wondering if they realized that the incredible total panic that would have ensued if all of a sudden the dolphins were talking to them about the end of the world.
Yeah. Well, here's a question that I have for you, and I don't have an answer, so obviously I'm going to ask you.
Questionable answer 15.
When Wonko tells Fenchurch and Arthur to listen to the bowl, they listen through the whole message. And at the end of the message in English, and this is why it tells us that they believe that the dolphins could speak to us if they chose to.
Mm-hmm.
The end of the message from the bowl, it says, "This bowl was brought to you by the campaign to save the humans. We bid you farewell."
Yes.
I wonder, and I don't know, I guess we're presupposing that that part of the message was brought to us by the dolphins. And the dolphins are involved with this whole process, but I'm wondering whether this campaign is a dolphin-centered campaign.
Yeah. Do you think that wherever they hail from,
Yes,
in the multiverse,
or there's another group of people within this universe that are part of the campaign?
I saw that as the dolphins were the same as Greenpeace or whoever it was that Arthur stopped in to donate money.
Right.
So the dolphins are that organization for human beings.
I gotcha. Right. So there could be all kinds of species and all kinds of aliens all over the universe that are part
That they
of this
send junk
campaign.
mail to
Right.
raise money
Exactly.
to save the humans.
Exactly. You got it. I like that.
Right. Yeah.
They're the administrators of the campaign, and the campaign are all over the universe.
Yes, and the way we would go to the far outreaches in the corners of the world to help, that's where they came, to the backwaters of this galaxy to help us poor humans.
I like that. So that's why I wonder whether it's as clear and as simple for the dolphins to have spoken English. You know what I mean? The two thoughts are combined in the book, where this voice from the bowl says these things in a clear English language.
Yes.
That we understand without babelfish.
Right.
You know? So I think I like that. I really like the way you describe that.
Well, good. All right.
Questionable answer 16.
When they were trying to describe what Wonko the Sane looked like, they used this description, which was a little bit odd. So it said, if you took a couple of David Bowies and stuck one of the David Bowies on top of the other David Bowie, and then attached another David Bowie to the end of each of the arms of the upper of the first two David Bowies, and wrapped the whole business up in a dirty beach robe, that would be kind of what resembled John Watson. But really, what would that really look like?
Oh, I'm thinking something like Groot.
Yeah, Groot is a pretty good example of what I would imagine that would look like.
All that just to say that he looked awkward and ungainly. You know?
Yeah, gangly and yeah.
Makes me laugh. I'm sure it made the author laugh as well.
I bet it did.
Questionable answer 17.
Arthur and Fenchurch had decided that they were going to go on a pilgrimage to find the message. And Arthur figured it had to be the same message that Prack had told him about all those years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So why did Arthur have to remember the address that he was having so much trouble writing down in the last book instead of just looking it up in the guide? If this is a known place of pilgrimage, if not a tourist attraction, shouldn't there be an entry in the guide?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I thought a lot about this. There's no evidence from the book or from the author himself that this particular location is mentioned in the book. The fact that Prax has to give it to Arthur in such painful detail implies, at least to me, that it's not a universally known thing. Although I know what you're saying, because they describe it as, almost carnival-like in the book.
Yes.
When they get there. And they talk about the different stages that they go through and the different booths and things that they see and find there.
And it's not a short little trip either.
No, it's definitely a long haul that they have to go through. And as they say, the devout are not allowed to ride the scooters.
Correct.
So there does seem to be a little bit of a mix. I'm going to say that this address is not necessarily in the guide. That's going to be my belief here. It is an address that can be determined by looking for it or seeking it out. But what makes me think it's not in the guide? While they are walking, they only encounter one other individual.
Correct.
And that is...
Marvin.
Marvin.
Yes.
Another one of their own group,
Was he around in the Heart of Gold when Prack was giving Arthur the address?
I believe he was.
So he can read Arthur's brainwaves. He could have gotten the address from Arthur. So
Yes.
he would have known.
Right. He would have known of the address, or he would have known of the location of the message from Arthur.
Yes, but it just talked about how worn the paths were and how there were concession stands and
Yes.
booths selling sun hats and all these other things. So
And that's why I agree your question is an excellent one. And my answer is only a speculation because there is no way to do anything other than that. But I'm going to say it's not in the book.
I'm sure it's not. I was just trying to figure out why it wouldn't be in the book or how it would have been left out. And it just dawned on me now that there's a passage that said something about things get in the book if they read well.
Right.
So whoever wrote the entry about God's final message didn't spice it up and make it sound interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So it just never made it into the book.
And even if it was in the book, why wouldn't the actual message be in the book?
Right. Yeah. That would... that would... You don't have to go.
I'm going to firmly stick to my nebulous point.
Okay. You should have that looked at.
Questionable answer 18.
Well, you mentioned Marvin. He was the only other one on the path to the message.
Yes.
And when they were speaking with Marvin, he mentioned that he was 37 times older than the universe itself because of all of the back through time that they sent him on, all these crazy humans to do their bidding.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, he's also all spare parts that have been replaced at least 50 times.
Right.
I would say that his at least number should be much, much, much higher than 50.
It would be an amazing feat if, in fact, his description of his lifespan is accurate.
Correct. I have to believe that Marvin is exaggerating because we know of some of his back through times and waiting, but I would believe that he's not even one time the age of the universe from what we've read about him because
Right.
he waited till the end from, we'll just say, halfway. You know, so I'm just wondering who else was sending him on all these time travel trips. So did Marvin come up with a way to make things up that he always said? Why make things up when life already is so horrible? You don't need to invent any more of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, but again, I think this is the last time we know of Marvin. Isn't that correct?
Yes, this is the end of Marvin.
Right. So here's my problem theory with this encounter with Marvin. We don't really know what's happened in the intervening times to Marvin.
We do not.
And he doesn't seem to tend to lie about things. He does exaggerate things, and that's what we think he's doing here. But because we don't really know, and we've already established that there is time travel through the other books that we've read, it's conceivable that he's had 30 times more life than we know, and this is the last steps of his mortal or metal existence.
Yeah. Well, we know he spent time with the cricket men that we don't know what happened, and they certainly had ability to time travel.
Yes.
So I think that possibly they were sending him on other errands. We don't know. He never mentioned it.
That's true.
Questionable answer 19.
The big finale at the end of the book is we finally get to learn God's final message to his creation. I guess I'm going to add a second part that I didn't originally write. The first part that I ask that you know about is the message starts out with we, not I, and I want to know why. And then Marvin said he was satisfied with the message. Were you? This whole book is leading up to this message.
Mm-hmm.
Did it deliver the punch it needed at the end of the book?
Oh, good question. Okay, so this is really kind of interesting. I mean, we only have a human perspective when we kind of look at these things. But even from a human perspective, you already know this, the concept of monotheism has not been around that long.
Correct.
In fact, some would say 2,000 years or more. You know?
Right.
And even at that, the monotheists that believe in God actually consider him a triad.
Yes.
So he or she is three, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Correct.
So there are many other religions. Most other religions, almost all that I know of, are not monotheistic. So they would be a we when they refer to their gods. I would even argue that a Christian might consider it we, although it feels odd.
It
because
does.
It's a triad, as I've already said. So we makes more sense than any other pronoun that they could possibly have used here. So the next question.
Yeah, this one wasn't on our list.
I love the question because I keep thinking about the epilogue.
Right.
And I think to myself, in what worlds does Adams believe he exists? And which gods does he pray to?
He is a devout atheist.
So that being the case, and the way you described the epilogue earlier in this episode makes me think that it's a perfect response from the creators. For that, I like it.
Yes. Yeah. There's certainly nothing in my mind that I said, oh, it should have been this. So I'm not saying that I've got a better idea of what that message should have been.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, was that a good enough message that makes you go, yeah, I feel good about that? And
well,
it
I'm
seems
not
like you do.
necessarily like Marvin. I'm not a pessimist to begin with, or I don't have a fatalistic view of the world. So at that level, I don't know that I would be happy if and say, "Oh, I've met my final bit of knowledge." But for an individual like Marvin, I can definitely see it capping off the end of his knowledge stream.
That then leads me to another question.
Questionable answer 20.
If you were Marvin and you saw that as the message, would you accept their apology?
Oh gosh. What does he say? He doesn't have any gratitude circuits?
That's true, yes. No, he's never had an occasion to find out.
Oh, there you go. Well, maybe this would be his one occasion.
Yes. So that was the last of the questions on my list.
Okay, Jeff, it's time to say goodbye.
All right. All right. No.
You want me to try that again?
I was I had what I was going to say, and then I was going to expand on it, and that's all that came out. I almost am wondering if I just want to... Thank you for listening to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. Look for us the first Thursday of every month for a full episode. We will also release a bonus episode later in the month. A very special thanks goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. We would also like to thank our talented friends and family for their voice work on our introductions and commercials. A very special thank you goes out this episode to Kelly Lesnick for counting up our questions. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettyneatidea.buzzsprout.com, where you can find links to all my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube as Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea, on Instagram as Watches Idea Podcast, and on Twitter at Watches Idea. If you'd like to contact us, our email is digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.